This conference
There
will
we go.
now be recorded.
So I guess I can't decide if we're supposed to be embarrassed or proud of the fact that we had we only got to week 4 before we had YouTube cancel one of our book club videos because we got cited on 2 things. We had that Saturday Night Live monologue, which is copyrighted material that SNL is not giving people the rights to republish, which I'm sure is because they're not aligned with what Woody Harrelson said in that monologue. And then we also got tagged for misinformation about medical misinformation, which is interesting because I reviewed the afterword from last week, and all we did was discuss other YouTube videos that were talking about COVID. So somehow we managed to get dinged for other YouTube videos. So I've cut the afterword off and reposted the last week's session. So if anybody's interested in seeing the conversation about the declaration, they can at least do that. But out of an abundance of caution, we didn't include the little Schoolhouse Rock video. But hello and welcome, and thank you everybody for joining us. I don't know, there's a Michelle on. I don't know if that's Michelle Peterson. We were under the impression.
It is me. I'm driving.
Oh,
Hey, Michelle.
okay.
Hello.
Well, I'm glad you can make it. You can listen in, and we'll try to make the information exciting. It's it's very important information, very important material. I'm not sure it's the most exciting material to review, but we'll do our best. That's what the Schoolhouse Rock video is about. And it was at least encouraging to see while we looked for it that it's still a video that's in use. And I think it looks like a subsidiary of Disney may have bought all those videos, but they're still using them and kids are still using them. So at least some kids are being taught about the Declaration and the Constitution and, the whole I'm just a bill song and all that, so that's all good stuff. And so, all is not entirely lost. There are some people still trying to teach the right stuff. So that was encouraging. I'm going to switch my share.
Ken, I want to know how many people are actually singing along with that, because I was singing in the car with it. And it's just so funny because my son's with me in the car right now, and he said that they actually watched that when he was in junior high when they were learning the Constitution and the Preamble. So their teacher actually played that for them, and he's 29. So they were still playing it then for him.
Right. It's good stuff and catchy.
Right. Yeah, I thought that was a good one. I know it may have seemed a bit academic or something, but I think, in my opinion, being a kid and them using it and understanding that they were using it when, let's call it 50 years ago, maybe 45 to 50 years ago, I think those Schoolhouse Rocks were all released. And then I think they did them for a while after that. But I think they're pretty catchy and good for kids. And I'm glad to hear, Michelle, that they were still doing it 29 years ago, or doing it when your son was in school. So anyway, thought we'd start.
So as far as I could see, it looked like the authentic old school ones that everybody's familiar with between 1973 and 1975 that they were made. So we'll go ahead and get started then. We had a few more people who joined, so thank you. And looks like just about everybody's muted, but as long as your background's quiet, that's fine. Things have been rolling along pretty smoothly. So we have a few people who still raise their hands, a few people who just comment in chat and talk about, if they have a comment or just share the comment. So all those things that everybody's been doing has been working out. So we can just kind of roll with the flow there and continue in the old protocol. A reminder that we can find the previous week's videos on the Freedom Reading Hall page on the Illinois Freedom Alliance website. There's a QR code there to get there, and I'm pretty sure Jody's been sharing the link to that page in the invites and follow-ups. So that page is the same every time. We're not doing anything to the path. It's just one web page, and we keep adding subsequent weeks as we go through our materials. So you can go to that same page probably in a day or two and be able to see this recording as well as all the previous ones. And of course, the book club is sponsored by IFA. That's why we're landing on their site. So if anybody's willing, they could use some financial support whenever anybody has an opportunity or is looking for something to put a few dollars behind. All right. So today we're going to cover the Constitution, we're going to cover the preamble, and then Articles 1, 2, and 3. There's a lot of material to cover once, you know, the Constitution as a whole. And so we try to break it up, and we'll see how it goes. Obviously encouraging conversation, anything anybody has to share, to contribute, you know, please feel free. I'll lead the way with reading. If I start getting tongue-tied or I need to tag out, you know, if anybody wants to jump in and do some reading, it'd be great. Or actually, no, I don't have all the text to share, so I guess I'll be doing all the reading. Never mind. So we'll start with the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. So that's it. That's the whole preamble. And it's interesting, in my opinion. It's not very long. It's referred to a lot. That song actually includes the entire lyric to it, so it's a great way for kids in school to remember the preamble so that when they take the Constitution test, they could jot the whole thing down if they needed to. But it's interesting, if anybody was watching the video, I know as I read it the first time, as I read the preamble, the first time getting ready for, not the first time, but the first time getting ready for this book club meeting, I saw particularly that the phrase promote general welfare and the word welfare being capitalized. And I had a little twinge because I felt like, you know, we're dealing with a lot, this fight against socialism and the idea of being in a welfare state, being in a place where the government is taking care of you. And that's really not where, you know, our founders were trying, you know, that's not what they were trying to set up for us and not what they had envisioned. So I was struck by that phrase. But it's interesting, if you watch the video, while they're singing about promoting general welfare, they show people voting. So, you know, it's not welfare in the sense that we use that phrase now, but instead, you know, promoting the general well-being of Americans and securing our blessings of liberties. And, you know, I think it's important that the phrase, the whole thing, the preamble sort of works together as a overarching idea, not something meant to be picked apart, and also is meant to sort of set the groundwork for what the rest of the document's going to do. You know, what the articles and amendments are intending. So I don't know if anybody else had any other thoughts they wanted to share.
So my son
Ken,
was wanting me to tell
oh,
the story, but sorry. So when he was in the Marine Corps, they had the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps came out when he was deployed in Bahrain, and they went over the preamble when they were all in formation, and they got to the part right before posterity, and he said, "Does anybody know the next word?" And Andrew said, "Posterity, sir." And he said, "Yep." He said, "And what does that mean?" And so Andrew said, "Future generations." And so he gave him his challenge coin because he said of all the times he's asked that question, not one Marine could tell him the definition. How sad is that?
Well, Ken, I just wanted to say, it says promote the general welfare. It doesn't say provide the general welfare, and I think Congress better find the difference between the two.
Right, exactly. So, right, it says a lot in just a few words. I think 52 words, and it was interesting preparing for today. Was doing a lot of poking around, looking for information and information to share. And people talk about the preamble, I guess, specifically as, the term preamble sort of just implies that it's the introduction, but there's a lot of legal theorists who talk about it, talk about the fact that, it establishes some ground rules in and of itself. It's not just simply an introduction to the important part. It's important,
Right.
On its own merit.
So I was doing a little digging on the preamble, and it's interesting. The preamble, well, based on on constitutional research, is really the framework, the legal framework for the rest of our Constitution in its simple, majestic format. And it's interesting, it was written in a way where there's a lot of uncertainty of the direction of our country. So it was written initially to establish this framework, and that even, it said James Monroe and Alexander Hamilton essentially argued, Hamilton, if you look at his Federalist Paper number 84, and James Monroe basically argued that essentially it made it, in and of itself, prevented the need for the Bill of Rights. I'm not sure exactly what they meant for that. So if anyone has any thoughts around it, but when it was written, they would debate essentially about whether or not in and of itself it was providing the legal framework, in a nutshell. And the Bill of Rights, use the
Right.
word
I think,
imitate.
I think there's a lot of interdependence between the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence. Jody and I were talking with Dave Shistokis actually on, what was that, last Thursday. He was up in Will County on that election integrity case, and he was sharing the idea that the Declaration of Independence is sort of the what, we are establishing ourselves as this independent country, and the Constitution is the how. So it's interesting thinking of them that way. And then, like Jody was saying, as they wrote the Constitution, they added the Bill of Rights right away because they recognized, these men who wrote these documents were very, they had a good insight into humanity and some of our faults and the way power and, being in control can be abused. So, immediately in building the framework for the government, they also built a framework for some of our most important rights and how to protect them. So really, it's amazing, and amazing that I think the Constitution was written in 100 days, which you look at the kind of menial laws that Congress works on these days, and they take years to work through them and pass them. And here, the entire framework of our country was written in 100 days. So I don't know if anybody else had anything on the preamble, or we can move on, which is fine because
There's
Article
another
1's
slide, Ken.
Was there? Oh,
Yeah. So I was just kind of wondering if anybody had anything to add around historical background, and we sort of just covered the legal effect of it. And in the Library of Congress, they talk a little bit about how there have been some Supreme Court cases that have cited the preamble in their arguments, or people in front of the Supreme Court, but that in general, it is understood by Congress, both legislative, executive, and judicial branch, that it doesn't have substantial power within the federal government, outside of the fact that it builds this legal framework so that the rest of the articles can be written and delivered. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't really realize that, I guess, in terms of its lack of legal, foundation in general, or how it's perceived by our government. I don't know if anyone knows how long ago the preamble was actually its origins began.
I don't.
No one. So supposedly the petition for rights started in 1628, Habeas Corpus Act of 1679, and then the Bill of Rights 1689. There's several acts that occurred in that time window that helped establish the preamble.
So are you
It says
saying
here it took 6 months to write all the Federalist Papers. And so it's interesting how they could write the Constitution in 100 days, but a giant debate to the argument about the Constitution, about its validity and so forth.
So then did it take more than 100 years to write it altogether? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it looks like the original draft was done on August 6, 1787, but I think they are, let's see.
More like 160 years.
Well, I think that's the idea there, is that the preamble is based on text that started at that time and then evolved. The colonies were working on documents trying to establish their rights under rule of the crown for a long time. So their
Okay.
first efforts were trying to sort of interface with documents like the Magna Carta and find their own place alongside or in adjacent documents. And then eventually that gave way to our creating the documents that defined ourselves as just an independent country.
Right. In the original draft, it stated the states by name, which is interesting. But then that was just a draft. And then, there were additional, Morris supposedly was the one who basically built the goals of the Constitution about forming more perfect union, establishing justice and domestic tranquility. So he basically built the whole lyrical part of the preamble. So anyway, I don't know if anyone else has anything else on the preamble.
We can move on because we have a lot of text, particularly in Article 1.
Okay.
So we're going to cover Articles 1, 2, and 3, which essentially define the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch, respectively. So I forget what my next slide is. Okay. So I'll go ahead and read through Article 1. Try to not put people to sleep. And then we can discuss it. So there's Article 1 is our longest article today. It's got 10 sections. So, but most of them are pretty short. So Section 1, Congress. All legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and House of Representatives. That's it. That's all of Section 1. Section 2, the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. No person shall be a representative who shall not have attained to the age of 25 years and been 7 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of the Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall be by law direct. The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative, and until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. When vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. The House of Representatives shall choose their speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment. So that's it. That's everything that the Constitution gives directly to the House of Representatives. Section 3, the Senate. The Senate of the United States shall be composed of 2 senators from each state, chosen by the legislature thereof for 6 years, and each senator shall have 1 vote. Immediately after they shall be assembled in consequence of the first election, they shall be divided as equally as they may be in 3 classes. The seats of the senators for the first class shall be vacated at the expiration of the 2nd year, of the 2nd class at the expiration of the 4th, and of the 3rd class at the expiration of the 6th, so that 1/3 may be chosen every 2nd year. And if vacancies happen by resignation or otherwise during the recess of the legislature of any state, the executive thereof may make temporary appointments until the next meeting of the legislature, which shall then fill such vacancies. No person shall be a senator who shall not have attained the age of 30 years old and be 9 years a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of the state for which he shall be chosen. The Vice President of the United States shall be President of the Senate, but shall have no vote unless they be equally divided. The Senate shall choose their other officers and also a President pro tempore in the absence of the Vice President, or when she shall exercise the office of the President of the United States. The Senate shall have sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall on an oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to the law. So that's it for the Senate. Then a particularly important category for me, Section 4, elections. It's 2 sentences. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the place of choosing senators. The Congress shall assemble at least once in every year, and such meeting shall be on the first Monday in December, unless they shall by law appoint a different day. So that's it. That's all the Constitution tells us about elections outright. Section 5, Powers and Duties of Congress. Each House shall be the judge of the elections, returns and qualifications of its own members, and a majority of each shall constitute a quorum to do business. But a smaller number may adjourn from day to day and may be authorized to compel the attendance of absent members in such manner and under such penalties as each House may provide. Each House may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. Each House shall keep a journal of its proceedings and from time to time publish the same, excepting such parts as may, in their judgment, require secrecy. And the yeas and nays of the members of either House on any question shall, at the desire of 1/5 of those present, be entered on the journal. Neither House during the session of Congress shall, without the consent of the other, adjourn for more than 3 days, nor to any other place than that in which the two Houses shall be sitting. Section 6, Rights and Disabilities of Members. The Senators and Representatives shall receive a compensation for their services to be ascertained by law and paid out of the Treasury of the United States. They shall in all cases, except treason, felony, and breach of the peace, be privileged from arrest during their attendance at the session of their respective houses, and in going to and returning from the same, and for any speech or debate in either house, they shall not be questioned in any other place. No senator or representative shall, during the time for which he was elected, be appointed to any civil office under the authority of the United States, which shall have been created, or the emoluments whereof shall have been increased during such time. And no person holding any office under the United States shall be a member of either house during his continuance in office. Section 7, Legislative Process. All bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives, but the Senate may propose or concur with amendments as on other bills. Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it becomes a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approves, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to reconsider it. If, after such reconsideration, 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent together with the objections to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered, and if approved by 2/3 of that House, it shall become a law. But in all such cases, the votes of both Houses shall be determined by yeas and nays, and the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered on the journal for each House respectively. If any bill shall not be returned by the President within 10 days, except Sundays, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law in like manner as if he signed it, unless the Congress by their adjournment prevents its return, in which case it shall not be a law. Every order, resolution, or vote to which the concurrence of the Senate and House of Representatives may be necessary, except on a question of adjournment, shall be presented to the President of the United States, and before the same shall take effect, shall be approved by him, or being disapproved by him, shall be repassed by 2/3 of the Senate and House of Representatives, according to the rules and limitations prescribed in the case of a bill. All right, this is a big one. Section 8, Powers of Congress. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. To borrow money on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nation and among the several states and with the Indian tribes, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies throughout the United States, to coin money, regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin, and fix the standards of weights and measures, to provide the punishment of counterfeiting the securities and current coin of the United States, to establish post offices and post roads, to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive rights to their respective writings and discoveries, to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, to define the punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the laws of nations, to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water, to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years, to provide and maintain a navy, to make rules for the government and regulation of the land and naval forces, to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions, to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving the states respectively the appointment of the officers, the authority of training of the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress, to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may by secession of particular states and acceptance of Congress become the seat of the government of the United States, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings, and to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. So that was the big one. That was the powers of Congress. Section 9, powers denied Congress. So these are things that Congress does not have the right to do. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it. No bill of attainder or ex post facto law shall be passed. No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid unless in proportion to the census of enumeration herein before directed to be taken. No tax or duty shall be laid on articles exported from any state. No preference shall be given by any regulation of commerce or revenue to the ports of one state over those of another, nor shall nor shall vessels be bound to or from one state, or be obliged to enter, clear, or pay duties in another. No money shall be drawn from the treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law, and a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures and all public money shall be published from time to time. No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatsoever from any king, prince, or foreign state. All right, last one. Section 10, powers denied to the states. No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligations of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. No state shall, without the consent of the Congress, lay any imposts or duties on imports or exports, except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws, and the net produce of all duties and imposts laid by any state on imports or exports shall be for the use of the Treasury of the United States, and all such laws shall be subject to the revision and control of the Congress. No state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any duty of tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in times of peace, enter into any agreement or compact with another state, or with a foreign power, or engage in war, unless actually invaded, or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. Whew. So there you go. There's Article 1. So we covered a lot of material, and we covered, everything's expertly written. So it takes a moment to get used to reading this kind of verbiage. It's well above and beyond the cheesy texts we all send one another all the time. And even, official documents you might see at work, contract documents, they're just not written in this kind of English where so few words can say so much. So, and despite the fact that that was long, still we covered copywriting and trademarks. We covered, the powers. Oops, what's going on here? We covered the powers of Congress and the House of Representatives and the Senate, and how elections run, at least from a federal perspective, and then the powers and duties of Congress. So, anybody have any initial thoughts after all of that before I go into some questions? Everybody still awake?
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
I was confused several times. I see it throughout Articles 1, 2, and 3, where it talks about when someone's elected, a citizen of the United States, and who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state in which he shall be chosen.
Sure.
What does that mean?
So that's our first question,
Okay.
actually. So I pulled that in because it's interesting the way it's written. So it actually says that no person who shall not, when elected, be inhabitant of that state which he shall be chosen. So it's strangely worded, but basically it's saying that the person who's elected is not allowed not to live in the state he's elected in. So it's a lot of negatives piling up on top of themselves, but basically means you have to live in the state to which you're elected. So, and each time they make the reference, they say it the same way. So it is interesting that they repeat that method of pointing out this set of criteria for being elected to certain roles. But yeah, the House and the Senate use that same terminology. So did anybody catch if a Chief Justice can be impeached? It's tough. We covered a lot of material, I know.
Can I just ask about that?
Sure.
That what you were just talking about? So
Yep.
can you move to the state once you're elected? Can you get elected in Montana and live in New York and then move to Montana? It
Well,
doesn't
it
usually work
says,
that way.
right. It says when elected. So it feel like at least on election day, you would
Okay.
have to be living there
Yeah, it
if
seems
you
that
want
way.
to really be to the letter of what's said.
Okay,
But,
thanks.
but you'd have to be there on election day, not knowing if you're winning the election or not. So most people probably already live there. So this is an interesting question. I borrow these questions from a resource, so I didn't come up with them all by myself. But basically, everyone is subject to being impeached. Everyone, so all civil officers are subject to being impeached. But the interesting piece of that, and what's really more, that's in Article 1, but it's spoken around instead of spoken directly to. And then the point that's spoken more directly to, that's interesting, is that, you know, senators and Congress people are not actually civil officers, because the impeachment process is executed by them. So in order to be impeached, the House has to essentially agree on the impeachment, and then Senate holds the trial for the impeachment. So neither Congress people or senators can be impeached, because it'd be sort of a conflict of interest. It'd be within their own house. So instead, each of those houses, you can be expelled by a vote within your house. So Congress people can be expelled by by the House, and senators can be expelled by the Senate. Which, I mean, it's just, I know we read a lot, but it's just amazing the amount of ground they covered in so few words. Still, I can't get over how well everything is written and how it's thought out. So this is interesting. This isn't exactly taken from the document itself, but I'm sure everybody has watched proceedings minimally. Probably most of us watched the selection of the Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. So as we watch those sorts of proceedings, we see everyone's referred to as, you know, the gentleman from New York, the gentleman from Virginia, the gentleman from Texas, or so forth. So anybody have any idea why that's done? Why they refer to each other in that way instead of just saying, "Hey, Ted, why don't you get up and say what you got to say?"
Because there are only
Or,
two genders.
well, that's an interesting take. That might be a
Answer.
loaded response with a little bit of an extra stuck in there, but okay. Anybody else have any ideas? So it's interesting. The answer says it's a custom in all large deliberative bodies. I'm not sure that's true, but at least in government founded large deliberative bodies, maybe, to avoid the use of personal names in debate. The point being that it's essentially a decorum thing, separating the reference to the person as a political figure from their personal character. So it's an effort to avoid, you know, a personal attack, and talk to a person in the context of their role as a, you know, a representative of their particular state.
I do think it encourages them to look at their ideas or whatever they are debating, just like you said, Ken, in a more objective, less personal manner, whether you agree or disagree with it, right? It's easier to debate when you separate the topic from the person, right? And be more objective.
Right, and that's a very hard thing. I mean, we run into that all the time. Jody and I ran into some of that today, but I mean, it's difficult. There's a lot of people like all of us on this call trying to get involved and engaged, grassroots groups and different organizations. You know, everybody thinks they've got the idea that's going to solve the problem, and it's hard not to be emotionally invested. So then this idea of segregating the, you know, the mission you're on and whoever it is you're trying to work on behalf of from your, you know, personal emotional involvement is a great idea. like I said, I don't know that it's a custom in all large deliberative bodies, because certainly, like at work, I see people arguing and they do not do that. They do not do this. So it might be worth giving it a try, but that at least is why they do it. And it does appear, I don't know, I feel like we still see some emotional outbursts, even in Congress, where we watch, Rand Paul hammering Dr. Fauci, and they definitely become emotional. So it doesn't eliminate emotion from the equation.
It does feel to me like our media is obviously, I don't know if everybody agrees, but the media is what's actually making it emotional, right? I think a lot of it. I mean, they are creating a drama. Watching the Kevin McCarthy thing, if you go back and watch the amount of drama that the media and the way they were spinning what was happening adds to the, leaves it less objective and makes it more personal. I don't know. Feel like something should be in this article around that, but anyhow.
All right. So anybody know if we hear a lot about, at least lately, we had a change in power. So all the Republicans are getting back on their committees and all the Dems are getting kicked off of their committees. So did anybody catch if they get any extra compensation for their involvement in those committees? Very short answer. No, they do not. It's just a part of their duty and their role in Congress. This one was easy. It's right at the top of the role of Congress. So I'm sure everybody was paying close attention to every word I was reading. So the does make it very clear, raising revenue always originates in the House, and most appropriation bills start there as well. But that's not explicit. There's a lot of people talk about what is said and what isn't said in the Constitution and how some of those interpretations take place. So it does say very clearly the raising of revenue always starts in the House. And then people see appropriation bills as being similar. So it's become sort of a de facto way we do that, but it isn't explicitly stated. What is meant by the word veto? This is not in there. This is just interesting. So it described the veto process. Everybody follow that, right? So the two houses work on passing a bill. Oh, we could play that Schoolhouse Rock video too, but then we'd have to stop our recording. So the two houses propose and pass a bill. They give it to the president. If the president agrees, he can sign it. If he doesn't agree, he can send it back. That's called vetoing it. It's not, the term veto is not in the Constitution. We just talked through that and it was not in there, but the process is there. And then the two houses can still pass the bill with a 2/3 majority across both. And then there's a funky thing called, it's referred to, I don't know if I have that question in here, so I'll wait. Or maybe it's in my answer. It's in my answer, okay. So the word veto is Latin. It just means I forbid. So that's why that label was applied to the process. It's essentially the president saying, no, I do not assent to this being a law and won't agree. I'm not voting for it. So he's essentially standing against it. And then Congress has the tools it needs, like I said. So if they can accomplish a 2/3 majority across both houses, they can still pass it. And then there's this interesting little extra process. So when Congress passes a bill to the president, he has to act on it in 10 days. Otherwise, it'll just become a law. But if Congress adjourns during those 10 days, then that doesn't apply. So if they pass something new to him, and then adjourn within less than 10 days, he can just sit on it and not do anything. And that's called a pocket veto. It'll just die. It'll turn into nothing, which is a weird little kind of loophole that I just read it. They literally built it into the way the Constitution designed this process. So that one's a little confusing for me, why they would allow that sort of opening in there, but it's there and it's still there. Every once in a while we'll hear about a pocket veto. It's not very common, but I expect it's more of a, like Jody said, the media is the one who introduces a lot of emotion to a lot of what happens in government. So, they could use a pocket veto in a sort of a heated subject as it relates to what's going on in the media and what the public thinks about it, and they can sort of avoid doing anything specific, and it'll just go away without anybody acting on it directly. So it feels like it'd be used mostly in a place where they're trying to avoid accountability, which is too bad. And this was interesting. This was a side question I found that I thought was interesting. So we know that the president has his cabinet, but do we hear anything about the Constitution providing an opportunity for the formation of the cabinet? No, it doesn't. But even under the very first Congress, they started building out a Department of State, a Department of Treasury, and a Department of War. So they understood that the president needed support within the executive branch, but they didn't lay all that out in the Constitution. They created the tools to build it instead. The very first time the word cabinet appears in an act of Congress is in 1907, so it took them a while to even use the term. All right, anybody else have any thoughts or ideas about Article 1? We're going to move on to Article 2, but it's much shorter. So, anybody?
I just think it's a little weird that the senators have to be older than the House of Representatives.
All right, you caught that.
Like
Yeah,
you have
that
to
is
be an
interesting.
American longer and you got to be older because, I mean, I guess somehow we just think you're wiser or something in those extra 3 years, but we just.
Right, but I think, so one thought would be the way that the power split and decisions are made and how the Senate is seen as kind of leveled up from the House of Representatives as it relates to the way the power structure works. Perhaps that's why they need to be a little older. I don't know.
But the
Right, well, I
president
think,
doesn't have to be older. Like you would think that it's
Yes,
like, well, why wouldn't we level up that the commander in chief has to be, even older and longer a citizen and all that.
who knows what our forefathers were thinking when they built this, but many of them were in their 20s. So perhaps that was
No. Such
drove
a
some
short
of
lifespan back then. And then you think of like, people like AOC being in our House of Rep, and you're like, oh, she's just way too young. That's just too young. You can't go from bartender to legislator. Like,
no,
that's just too young.
no. Right. Although she probably, as a bartender, has some consultative skills that might help her as a Congress member. That was a joke.
Clearly, it didn't help her. I mean, she's still just. But also, the fact that we didn't build in requirements of like, you have to be able to read and pass literacy tests, and you should have some sort of education of a minimal level. Like, we didn't put any of that in there because maybe they just assumed that
right, well, that would
anybody in these
be,
positions.
that's an interesting idea because we see things, there's definitely context sensitive sort of ideas in the Constitution. The breakdown of taxes where they're talking about the free men and enslaved men, and then Indians who are not taxed, and then 3/5 of the rest, which is women and children. So that's all very
You had the
that was,
indentured servants, and then you had the 3/5 were the slaves. So indentured servants were different than slaves at the time. But
so it's that's very context specific, and an example that most people would look at like, oh, that's too bad. That's a bad way that things were going on at that time that they don't go on now. But what you're referring to is actually the inverse. At the time, like we talked about in previous calls, the people of the United States were very well educated. The colonialists who were here, who were trying to build America, were not paupers who came here who were uneducated. They were people who were, they brought the American dream with them. They came here to work and to excel, not to just lounge around. And you can see it in the documents they wrote. They were well spoken and well educated. And so in that context, they never thought they had to say, oh, let's make sure the guy can read, because they couldn't find a guy who couldn't read. So it seemed like a moot point to introduce into the Constitution. But you're right, sadly, now it does seem like, we listen to even the president speak and we're like, come on, do you have a basic understanding of English? It just doesn't feel like it's there.
right.
All right, we're going to move on to Article 2, which is the executive branch. So maybe we'll get some more answers about the presidency. Only 4 sections, but they're not short. So here we go. You're on mute.
Kara's made a couple comments, but that she noted something about Section 2, the 14th Amendment changed the end section of Section 2. So when we get there to that amendment, we should probably revisit this so that we can make it make sense.
Right. I think we're going to have a bit of back sort of cross-referencing to do as we move forward. All right, Article 2, Section 1. The executive power shall be vested in a President of the United States of America. He shall hold his office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President, chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress. But no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for 2 persons, of whom one at least shall be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves, and they shall make a list of all persons voted for and of the number of votes for each, which list they shall sign and certify and transmit sealed to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. The President of the Senate, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, shall open all the certificates, and the votes shall be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes shall be president, if such number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. And if there be more than one who have such majority and have an equal number of votes, then the House of Representatives shall immediately choose by ballot one of them for president. And if no person have a majority, then from the 5 highest on the list and said House shall in like manner choose the president. But in choosing the president, the votes shall be taken by states, the representations from each state having 1 vote. A quorum for this purpose shall consist of a member or members from 2/3 of the states, and a majority of all the states shall be necessary to a choice. In every case, after the choice of the president, the person having the greatest number of votes of the electors shall be the vice president. But if there should remain 2 or more who have equal votes, the Senate shall choose from them by ballot the vice president. The Congress may determine the time of choosing the electors and the day on which they shall give their votes, which day shall be the same throughout the United States. No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of the President. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained the age of 35 years and be 14 years a resident within the United States. So there you go. We leveled up again for the President. In case of the removal of the President from office or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the Vice President, and the Congress may by law provide for the case of removal, death, resignation, or inability both of the President and Vice President, declaring what officer shall then act as President, and such officer shall act accordingly until the disability be removed or a President shall be elected. The President shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation, which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them. Before he enter the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Section 2. The President shall be Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. He may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon any subject relating to the duties of their respective offices, and he shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons or for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. He shall have power by and with the advice and consent of the Senate to make treaties, provided 2/3 of the senators present concur, and he shall nominate, and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate shall appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States, whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for, and which shall be established by law. But the Congress may by law vest the appointment of such inferior officers as they think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. The President shall have power to fill up all vacancies that may happen during the recess of the Senate by granting commissions which shall expire at the end of their next session. Section 3. He shall from time to time give the Congress information of the state of the Union, and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. He may, on extraordinary occasions, convene both houses, or either of them, and in case of disagreement between them, with respect to the time of adjournment, he may adjourn them to such time as he shall think proper. He shall receive ambassadors and other public ministers. He shall take care that laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all of the officers of the United States. Section 4. The President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and convictions of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. All right, that was Article 2. Everybody still awake? All right, Fred's awake. So, any comments, thoughts? We did in fact level up. Now we're at 35 and 14 years as citizen. So, President is a senior to the Senate, that's senior to the House. So they sort of inherently created a hierarchy there of wisdom and decision making, I suppose, and probably was intentional. There sort of is that mentality, you know, things begin in the House, and if they can get through the House, then they have to be evaluated and approved by Senate, which is sort of like the next level. So it's interesting that they apply the age convention to that all the way through to the president.
Yeah, because we're always kind of taught to think of it as three equal branches, but then there's this hierarchy to it.
Right. Well, I don't know. Do they say they're three equal branches?
No, they never say it, but it just comes across that way when we're taught about it and we talk about it. And culturally, we've just always kind of applied it as like, these are three equal branches of government and there's checks and balances and blah, blah, blah. It's really not at all.
I think they're equally important, but I don't know that they're equal. So you've got, you know, different responsibilities. So you've got the legislative branch creating laws, and you've got the executive branch making sure the laws are adhered to, and then the judicial branch interpreting the law. So it kind of, everybody's got their job. It's hard to say which one's more important than the other. So in that sense, they seem equal, but still. So this is another interesting sort of side note. This isn't covered in what we just read, but I know there's a lot of debate about the electoral system and somewhat regular efforts in Congress to evaluate or try to eliminate the electoral system. So I thought I'd include this. So I don't know if anybody is familiar with this historically or understands how many other methods were considered, or if it's just somebody pulled the electoral system out of left field and just said, hey, you know, let's do this. And everyone, oh, okay, cool. Let's move on to the next thing. Anybody got any input on that? No. All right.
I do. How did, like, I don't understand this elector thing. I read it, but I don't think I've really understood it all these years.
Right. It's challenging, and I'm not sure I understand the way it's written. You know, it is the foundation for the electoral system that we have, and I believe there are some amendments that adjust it as we'll go through the amendments. But right, it's basically building the framework where, you know, the electors that they're speaking to in this context are, you know, the people who place the electoral votes on behalf of the voters of their state. So that the electors itself becomes a confusing term because some people use that term for the voters, you know, you and I as voters. But you know, essentially the process is that the number of electors is based on the population of the state in a number of different ways. So we have number of Congress people and number of senators. So the Congress people, senators is the same for every state, but the Congress people isn't. So there's still a disproportionate amount of votes between, you know, a big state like California and, you know, some of the smaller states like in the Northeast, but it's more balanced than if we just counted individual voters. So the point of the Electoral College is trying to keep, you know, like right now, if we disbanded the Electoral College and just went with the popular vote, it would be very hard for anybody who wasn't a Democrat to ever win because the number of voters in New York and California combined are very high. And then the same applies, you know, some of the blue states like ours. In our state, we have, you know, there's a reason to debate this number, but the voter roll at least suggests that we have
about 8.5 million voters, but 2.5 million of those voters are in Chicago, and another 2.5 are in suburban Cook County. So about almost 2/3 of the voters in the state are in Cook County. So, and Cook County is predominantly Democratic. So that means we have something that we have to, at least as the way they vote, which, as we've discussed, if voting, there's a lot of voter fraud. So the voting results are difficult to speak about without including that in the conversation. But if we set that aside temporarily and just reflect on the fact that many big cities vote predominantly Democratic, then we basically have everybody be a Democrat who was elected. If we didn't have the Electoral College to kind of create a sense of balance and create an opportunity for states with smaller population to have any kind of say in who gets elected. And the point of that is that our country's large, so it doesn't make sense for the people in New York and California and Chicago to decide who runs the whole country, because those people wouldn't be in touch with somebody who lives in Arizona or Montana at all, because it's a completely different environment from a physical perspective as well as a cultural perspective. So that was sort of the point of that. There were five methods altogether that they considered for electing the president. They considered just having Congress or the state legislatures vote, deciding that those people were put in place by the public so they can make the decision for them. They talked about state executives, where they'd have like an elected group of people within the state that would vote on behalf of the state, just separately. And so they went through a number of different methods. The electors method that we used, they even talked about, popular vote plus a lottery solution. It was very complicated as well. So there's, they didn't take it lightly. And I know there's people who argue that the electoral process isn't a good one, but I don't know. Understanding what it accomplishes and the fact that, every state, despite the huge disparity in our state populations, every state still has some say in what's going on in the country. I think that's a pretty good solution. I don't know if anybody else has any input on that.
It'd be nice if we did it for governor.
Yeah. Right. Well,
So
that's a good point, actually. I mean, that's really what's going on in Illinois, and that's exactly it. We can't overcome the vote in Chicago.
no.
I grew up in
So,
upstate New York, and it's the same thing. Whatever New York City wants, it goes against pretty much the rest of the entire state, except for like
right.
Buffalo, and everyone
Right.
suffers.
No, I don't know how many people are aware on this call that our legislature in Illinois is trying to pass ranked choice voting. So that's a bill that they're trying to present. And of course, beyond just presenting the bill, I think the last week they tried to have a hearing on it. We had about 1,000 signatures, a little over 1,000. What they do is they run out of time and they don't hear it, and then they reissue it with a new bill number, which essentially brings the witness slips back to zero again. So it's they're playing games, but and I don't know, Ken, if you want to explain, we're going in the wrong direction. Our government in Illinois is trying to take us in the absolute wrong direction as it relates to voting on the subject of governors, but
Right, so if anybody wants a super brief explanation of ranked choice voting and why it's absolutely crazy, first of all, Jody and I have been involved in election data for a year and a half here, really, really digging in deep. And it's all about trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. And many people, their first argument is, well, show me the fraud. Where's the bad vote, or where's the fake vote, or where's the fake voter? So that's a very hard thing to do right now, because of maladministration, because of poor data management, and because of processes that don't involve through chain of custody. So it's already very hard. So this new process would become just completely unauditable because there's so many layers to it, it's ridiculous. But part of that, so just to explain briefly how it works, so if you imagine there were however many, some number of candidates running for an office, and the way it works is when you rank choice vote, instead of just going in and saying, you know, I want this person to win, you would say, my first place choice is this person, and my second place choice is this person, and my third place choice is this person. So that's how you vote. And then they first pass, they count everybody's first rank vote. So if they count everybody's first rank vote, you have to get part of the rules is the winner has to get 50% or greater of the vote, kind of like they do. We've seen runoffs in Georgia, so it works like that. But they're not using ranked choice. They just have that provision that you don't need. It's more than a simple majority. You have to also have more than 50%. So right, Alaska uses ranked choice voting now. So if you run your voting and you count your first choices and you have first place person has 42%, the second place person has 30%, and the third place person has 19%, and you're done counting first place choices, nobody won. Nobody got to 50%. So now they would take the number 3 person and they would look at their second choices. So people who voted first for the person in third place, we would now look at their second choices and evaluate who got more out of the person who came in first and second. And then add those to those people. So number 3 would drop, and we'd be working on getting to the bottom of who wins between 1 and 2. So we'd look at three's other votes and look at who's got second place. And now if 1 and 2 still didn't break 50%, we would now look at 1 and 2's votes at who chose the other person third and add that on. I mean, it's just a nonsense. So
it's a way, right? It's a way that somebody like Trump, right, who might be super popular to some voters, so popular that they might go into a booth and only vote for one person, right? And have only one first place choice. But the second place person might have gotten there because, the long and short is it's how they get around the popular vote in a state.
Right.
And they're trying, right.
I forgot that part. Jody's mentioning it. You're not obligated to pick 2 and 3. So you could just pick your number 1 choice, and then that throws things even more out of whack. So it's a horrible method that really, I don't see how it could ever convey the will of the people. And it would be almost entirely unauditable because there's so many layers to it, it'd be impossible. And you don't get to see the content of the vote. All you get to see ever is the, who voted kind of thing. So it's just terrible. But yes, of course, they are trying to pass that for primaries in particular, because, for anybody who's been hanging out with Jody and I for a while, we've shared this idea, but not recently. Most of the cheating happens in the primary in Illinois. They use the primary to defeat the most powerful opponents and push the person who they can most easily beat to the top. So because we have an undeclared state, anybody can go in the primary and choose whichever ballot they want. So like in this midterm, Democrats went and voted for Bailey. They picked the Republican ballot and voted for Bailey because they knew he's a local yokel from Central Illinois. There's no way people in Chicago are going to vote for him. Absolutely no way. So they made him win the primary, and then he lost the election. So, all right. So
back on the subject.
Back on point. So who appoints Chief Justice? of the United States and for how long of a term Chief Justice being of the Supreme Court?
President.
So the president, we've seen it. This has been going on a lot lately. So the president appoints all of the justices of the Supreme Court, and then they have that hearing, and that hearing is all about the by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. So the president appoints someone, the Senate has to essentially agree. Otherwise, they move on to a new recommendation. So it's interesting that some of these processes, they're effective, I think, and they literally right back to our founding documents. You know, just still amazing. Then, does the president have the authority to call an extra session of Congress? I know we've seen this a couple times just over the past year or two. We've been dealing with issues that need to be resolved. Congress is in recess. There's been, you know, battles on the media, of course, talking about, oh, well, they're out of session. Too bad they can't solve this. Oh, we can't get anybody to call Congress into session, or we can't get anybody to call the Senate into session. And for the most part, my recollection is that all of those issues sort of just died in nothingness, in no action, because we behaved like our hands were tied, because there was no option, because no one in the House would call a session, or no one in the Senate would call a session. But the truth is the president could call a session. It does say on extraordinary occasion, but I feel like in the past 3 years, we've had quite a number of extraordinary occasions. So he can call into, he can convene both houses or either of them individually. Just, he was bestowed with that power. Boy, I don't remember this question. Can the Secretary of State take action with respect to recognizing a government without the consent of Congress? Now, this is right. This is the portion of what the states are prohibited from doing. So now, actually, this is sort of a primary role of the Secretary of State, working with and recognizing other governments and sort of acting as a ambassador, like the first ambassador for our country. I don't think it mentioned that. Did it mention? I didn't catch it. The number of justices in the Supreme Court? Oh, we're on Article 3. I didn't read it yet. Okay. Sorry. I keep up with my own presentation. So we're going to move on to Article 3. Anybody else have any comments about Article 2? All right. Lively bunch.
I was thinking of the Goldman Heights or whatever that territory was called that was in dispute for Israel. And then Trump just was like, yep, that's part of Israel. Settled, done. And we're moving to Jerusalem. That's the head of the country, you know.
Right.
He just kind of settled all of those debates or whatever with executive, and nobody's reversed it. Nobody's like gone back and said, okay, we're not going to recognize Jerusalem anymore and blah blah blah. Like they didn't do that, which I fully expected them to do when they came into power, but he hasn't, which is good. I mean, I'm glad he didn't, but yeah, that was kind of a sweeping without Congress or without other people's input.
Right, right, and that was interesting that hasn't been contested since he's been gone. Since I feel like there was a very concerted effort to write executive order after executive order to try to undo as much as possible. So
right. It does kind of make you wonder.
Right. All right. Article 3 is the judicial branch. Section 1. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court, and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges both of the Supreme and inferior courts shall hold their offices during good behavior, and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. Section 2. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made or which shall be made under their authority, to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between state and citizen of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming land under grant of different states, and between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens or subjects. In all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, and those in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. In all the other cases before mentioned, and the Supreme Court shall have appellate jurisdiction, both as to law and fact, with such exception under such regulation as the Congress shall make. The trial of all crimes except in cases of impeachment shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crimes shall have been committed. But when not committed within any state, the trial shall be at such place or places as the Congress may by law have directed. And then section 3. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession in open court. The Congress shall have power to declare the punishment of treason, but to attainder of treason shall work corruption of blood or forfeiture except during the life of the person attainted. That's it.
It's brief.
It is brief.
Isn't it kind of curious? They have the presidential oath, but they don't have the oath for the House or the Senate or a Supreme Court judge.
The Supreme Court. Right, that is interesting.
Kara put, what does doing good behavior mean? During good behavior mean?
Right, I'm guessing that's a way of saying while they're in good standing as a judge. But the interesting thing is it doesn't really talk about how they would lose that status. So how you would determine that they are not in good behavior. So I pulled in a question about the number of justices in the Supreme Court. Since it's not mentioned, and currently we are in a place where we're at least hearing somewhat regular threats of packing the court, increasing the number of justices to change the makeup of the court to dilute the conservative perspective, basically. So here's a brief history. The Chief Justice is mentioned in the Constitution, but the number of justices is not. There was an act in September 24th of 1789 provided for a Chief Justice and 5 associates. And then in February of 1807, they changed the associates to 6. Then in March of 1837, changed it to 8. And then in 1863, they changed it to 9. And then in 1866, they wrote a wrote a law that they would essentially allow attrition to occur to bring the number back down to 6. And then in 1869, they set the number at 8 again. So we have 8 justices and the Chief Justice, which is 9, which is what we have now. So interesting, a lot of flux, but never more than we have now. And apparently, in 1866, they thought we have too many now because they wanted the number of justices to be reduced. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about that. If anybody's looked into any of that, there was a lot of that in the news as Biden was taking office. It was one of the things that were being pushed, probably just in an effort to provoke fear amongst conservatives, because we finally had an upper hand in the Supreme Court, and now they wanted to change that, of course. And everybody was afraid that Trump's appointments were going to just wreak havoc on the world. And so far, all it's done is eliminate Roe v. Wade, which personally I think is a good thing. I think there's a lot of people who agree, but I'm not sure.
I agree.
I think there was some, maybe a week or two ago, I don't remember what even the decision was over, but Brown had her first decision that she brought forward, and it feels like it actually leaned more conservative. So there was definitely some stress. I don't know if anyone knows anything about it or what the decision was over, but I saw some kind of article on it.
Right, I saw something too, and I agree. It looked like her decision was
Wasn't it with the internet, the new internet rules?
Yes, it was.
Can you take a guess as to why Biden hasn't appointed more? I mean, I fully expected him to do that. He forgot. Yeah, thank you. Glad he did.
I'm sorry, what was the question? I didn't catch it.
Well, I was just wondering if, Ken, if you could speculate as to why Biden didn't. I don't remember what was said, why he didn't add Supreme Court justices. Or does he think that, payback would be brutal?
Right, well, I think the payback would be brutal. I mean, we're seeing it soon as Republicans had control of the House. They just like tore all the committees apart and ripped everybody out of them. But I mean, that's what happened to them. So it's that kind of thing. And while we behave like, a piece of our conservative perspective means that we have to be all soft-spoken and taking the high road, I hope by now, 3 years into this crazy, that even conservatives are learning that sometimes you need to fight for what you think is right. You can't just stand and wait for the other guy to realize it himself. That strategy is not working out great. So, right, I would like to believe that some of it is an understanding that, he wouldn't be in power forever, and that the backlash might be just devastating.
I think he might just be waiting on the second term.
It could be. So hopefully we can make sure that doesn't happen. Because I do think if he has a second, I mean, this has been crazy already. Some of the things that have happened, some of the executive orders. I mean, it's been so long. So much is happening. You can't even keep track. I think in the first 3 months of Biden's term, he had signed more executive orders than any other president, even ones that held 2 or 3 years, 3 terms in office, because we had that in the past. So he was just a machine as it relates to executive orders. Half of them just blindly canceling Trump's executive orders, and some of them just shutting things down like the pipeline project or, entire industries. So if that was a demonstration of his reserved behavior because it was his first term, I'm really frightened what a second term out of him would look like. So that's interesting, right? It's people argue that the Supreme Court suggests that it has more power than Congress because it can nullify an act, but that's not true. So the court has repeatedly argued that it doesn't have that power, that they interpret the law, and that the only problem that can exist that sort of may look like they are nullifying acts of Congress is if their interpretation of the law is that it goes beyond the powers granted by the Constitution. So ultimately, we all understand that's really, nowadays at least, where the Supreme Court comes into play, is what they refer to as inferior courts. Our inferior court system is enormous. So there's a lot of legal battles take place and never get to the Supreme Court. So only ones that require sort of that high level interpretation or an interpretation against the Constitution get there. So if it turns out that whatever is being brought before the Supreme Court proves to be an invalid law in the context of the Constitution, then it isn't a law. And that's what this last sentence is explaining, that they do have that power, which is to interpret the law. And if the law is bad on its face, then it isn't a law at all. And then that eventually happened. Well, okay, not so eventually. In 1803, Marbury versus Madison was the first case where the Supreme Court deemed, their ruling was unconstitutionality. So it was a national tax. I think that might be all my questions. Oh, no. Treason. It's an interesting explanation of treason. So it's a brief explanation of what treason is. Levying war, adhering to enemies, or giving your enemies aid and comfort. So not a very broad number of things you can do and be accused of being treasonous. And then goes on to explain that you can't be convicted unless you have two witnesses who will testify or you confess in open court.
What was the thing with Bradley Manning? Because he was released and able to transition into a woman and go on living his life and whatever. And it's like, but he was a soldier that misused his powers and his access to information to steal information and give it away. And I just feel like that was treason, and yet the guy wasn't executed. And at the
Right.
time,
Who
I kind of felt
really
like he should have been.
Right.
wasn't that Biden, one of the first things Biden did, or last things Obama? I don't remember the timeline, but
Obama released him.
okay, it was one of the last things he did, probably in his last pardons, right? As he was leaving office.
And I don't know how that didn't amount to treason. It just felt like that's definitely giving aid and comfort to the enemies and helping your enemies.
Definitely
Especially as
adhere.
a soldier, like, yeah.
For sure. It also feels reflective of some of the things, like a reflection of some of what we're currently kind of going through, is that there does seem to be considerable amount of things happening in our world that feel like it's hovering in that treasonous zone, particularly if there's pieces. Occasionally, I wonder if we're not really hearing all the truth or the facts, and so I don't know. It's just that's a perfect example of like what was going on there. Why wasn't there follow through as it pertains to our
There's other
Constitution?
stuff too that still feels like it's arguably, at least could be interpreted as treason. Biden released a group of prisoners that were being held in Guantanamo that were related to the 9/11 attack. Now I know the 9/11 attack in and of itself isn't questioned by some people, but still, accepting that as an act of terrorism against our country, those people are being held for it. Releasing them, how was that not aid and comfort? Just letting them go. They were never
Yeah.
really tried. They were just held for a while and then let go. So, I don't
Isn't that
know.
in connection with the Bo Bergdahl?
What's that?
Yeah.
Isn't that a trade for Bo Bergdahl?
Yeah. So does that
Who
change it
probably should
though?
be tried for treason.
Yeah, I always wondered what the real story with that guy was. If he actually did go AWOL and just kind of abandon, or if he was a CIA or some sort of intelligence officer actually, because everything about him was just weird and it was handled weird and none of it made sense. That was just
I agree. There's a lot of things that we see. Well, I guess, I don't know. It's really, in our current context, it's really difficult. Jody and I have had conversations and actually shared the idea quite a bit publicly that it feels like we're currently living in a state of lawlessness. So it's hard to have conversations about the law. How many times
what is a
I,
woman?
I
Women
imagine
can vote,
everybody,
but what is a woman?
right? Well, I imagine everybody on this call has at least seen one image or video of Hunter Biden smoking crack. That's illegal. So why does that continue to happen and we just ignore it? But we do. And I mean, there's other examples, but that's just one that's very publicized. And other images of him doing other things that are illegal. It just, it doesn't seem like it makes sense.
What
How
qualified him to sit on an energy board in Ukraine? Like, this guy has no professional experience or background. It's like, obviously, that doesn't make any sense. Why is that okay?
right, or the video that for in his clearly cognitive, you know, questionably cognitive state, Biden himself seems proud of that video where he went over to Ukraine and made them fire the attorney general or their equivalent of the attorney general in order to transfer money to them because they're investigating something that was going to eventually lead to them figuring out that his son was involved in something illegal. And he literally talks in a press conference about how, oh yeah, I just told them you better get fired or I'm not giving you the money. Ha ha ha. It's like, really? Okay. So, Jordy, I need you to tap in here. You were talking about some movies to watch, and I didn't pull that in. You have those?
Right, I'm kind of looking at them right now. So,
Anyway, before I move on, I guess I should ask if anybody has
sure.
any other questions about the articles. It's basically the material we intended to cover today and conversation about them. I don't want to cut anybody off if they had anything else to share. Then we're going to move on to just some conversation about some other things to watch. I know we had in General Flynn's book, a lot of input as from him about things we could watch that promoted the ideas of 5G warfare. And it's just, there's a lot of stuff out there that we watch, and particularly older movies that, the last couple of years have really opened our eyes to some of the things that are going on in the world and give us a different perspective of many things, most things, nearly all things. So you go back and watch some of these movies, and there's really it's an interesting experience to see them again. And so we're just going to tap into some of that with some continued input. And if you guys have any ideas or have seen any movies lately or rewatched any movies lately and want to share with the group, please don't hold back. Let us know.
The Lives of Others. I watched, it's an older movie, but it's not like that old. It might be from the 70s or 80s or 90s. I'm not sure, but it's about, I believe it's about Nazi Germany, and people start tattling on each other and basically turning their neighbors into the Stasi. And it was very interesting. It was really telling. It was kind of like that, sort of like the goldfish video, but only like the opposite. Instead of saving them, they turned them in.
Right. Right. I just looked it up. 2006. So it looks like it's available on Prime Video. If
Oh, I didn't think it was that current.
anybody
I thought
has
it was
that.
old.
Right. And it's set only in 1984 East Berlin.
Oh, okay. So it is like the time of the movie is in the 80s. Okay, that makes
Right.
sense.
Right. Right. So it probably makes it look like the movie's older, but it's not really that old.
Yeah.
So that's almost 20 years. So it's a little older.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And it's that kind of thing that Jody and I realized that like feels like so much of the current everything. It's not just, we talk about media all the time, but it's not just media. It's not just the news. It's not just Fox and CNN. It's like you go to Netflix or Prime, all the new shows have some kind of weird dystopian slant to them that we don't find this to be particularly entertaining since it's so similar to real life. That's not fun. So you go back to a movie like this and it might be a little more honest because it's almost 20 years old now. More authentic view of some of these ideas.
So one of the I don't know if it looks like it was a movie, but it's free on YouTube called A More Perfect Union. It was released in 1989. America Becomes a Nation. It's by Lionheart Filmworks, so you can watch it on YouTube for free. Here, actually, I'll share the link in the chat. So it looks like it's about almost 2 hours. So it's a feature length film, and it just the premise is it just says Constitution Day, September 17th, a feature film dramatizing the events of 1787, the Constitutional Convention. I guess Brigham Young University put it together to commemorate our 200th anniversary in drafting of the United States Constitution. So we haven't watched it yet, so I can't tell you what, the quality, but it has a lot of very positive comments and a lot of thumbs up. So, and then, there are some other movies. I don't know what you guys mentioned. I turned my sound off while I was searching because I had opened it just to make sure the movie ran. But
right. So you put it through. So the YouTube link is the movie Jody's talking about, and I just put the IMDb link to The Lives of Others that Terry mentioned. So
okay. Right. It's hard to find good movies. There was a show, I don't know if anyone watched it, called John Adams. which I think it was a very well done series, but that likely has a lot of information on our Constitution and our forefathers. Let me see if I can actually find it. Let's see, I'll share the link. Yeah, it was an HBO series. Did anyone watch it?
That the one with Paul Giamatti in it?
Trying to watch it while I don't have my volume on so you guys don't hear it in the background. Yes, it is Paul Giamatti. We watched it way back. So it was on HBO and it was about 14 years ago. I wonder though if you can actually catch it for free.
Did you say John Adams?
Yeah. So it's available on HBO Max. I'll throw that in the chat.
It was a mini series. It doesn't really look like you can find it for, wait a second, what is this? So if you go, I don't know if you all have HBO, but it's a 7-episode series. And if you don't have HBO, you have to pay for it. But I thought it was well acted and very interesting. Definitely covered the period of time when our Constitution was being written.
I think I saw it. It's really good.
Yeah. And of course, the movie The Patriot, but that's more about our Revolutionary War than it is about the Constitution.
That's sort of the Rocky of the Patriot movement. Definitely makes you feel like you want to go kick some crown ass when you get done watching it.
Well, it definitely did a great, in my opinion, the one thing that I thought was remarkable is just the way families worked during that time period and how they stood together and, you know, essentially worked unified and sacrificed so much for our country. And it's funny you mentioned that. You guys were talking about that goldfish video, and I don't know if everyone's seen it. Actually, I was trying to find that one too to share it. I don't know, Ken. It was definitely on Telegram this week. And
What was it called? Do you know?
I don't. I'm looking. I don't. If I find it, I'll send it out in the next in an email. But it was essentially, you guys described it or I don't know if you described the video, but there's definitely times where I feel like I'm Hannah in the classroom and I just can't handle it anymore, and I have to get up and put the fish back in the bowl regardless of the consequences. And I do think that was sort of a message to all of us, really, is like, what does it take really to get up and start doing something?
Very well. On some level, isn't that where all of us are at? Everybody on this call? We're trying to figure out where we stand up and do something, how we stand up and do something. Hopefully it is. It's good. It's good to be inquisitive and want to understand. But I think we're all getting to a point now where I hope we're all getting to a point now where we understand. We do genuinely understand. And that understanding is about the fact that we've kind of been lazy in defending our liberties and just sort of enjoying basking in the freedom or perceived freedom that we had. around us, and while we were not paying attention, there were forces working against us. So if we don't do something to regain those liberties, we're going to lose them permanently.
Something I was thinking about all week, Ken, was you told us the fate of many of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And a lot of them lost everything, and how we basically squandered what they lost.
Right. Right. They paid a heavy price for choosing to stand up for our country. And while we tear down statues and try to defy our history, people don't reflect on what really happened before us.
I was doing this weird deep dive into the Salem witch trials and whatever this week, and it was interesting the perfect storm that came together that allowed for those to happen, and just the social contagion of it. And it just kind of made me think of like right now with the transgenderism and whatever, and the social contagion, and how it's just us as a populace doing the same things all over again. And it was really kind of weird to be like in this 1600 literature and all this 1600 documents and papers and whatever, but it's like they could have been talking about right now, and they were having the same arguments and moral arguments and social arguments and legal arguments and everything that we have right now. And it's like, wow, we have not changed at all. This is very weird.
Right. Right. It is interesting when you think about the idea of sort of groupthink and a social consensus like that. And that if anybody's listened to, I
Learn
forget,
from your past, you're doomed to repeat it. I mean, that's literally what we're doing. We forgot our past, and so now we're doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over because we didn't learn from our past anymore. We just forgot it.
right. But that's literally what I think the agenda is. You know, they're tearing down the statues, telling us we have to, you know, just instead of acknowledging, I mean, it doesn't seem complicated to me, but apparently it is a complicated idea that our history is what it is. We've grown because of the things we've experienced. So yes, slavery was a bad thing, but if anybody's paying attention, there was a civil war that ended it. That was you know, mankind, the president was involved. Clearly, there was contention about the idea of slavery, and it took a kinetic war to solve that problem. And we moved on from it. So while the idea of being a slave isn't a pleasant one, it's still our history, and it was you know, I guess one of the things I read recently was it was actually a meme. So it was like I was shocked that I was so impacted by a meme, but I mean, it wasn't a humorous one. It was intended to convey a serious idea, and the idea was that our forefathers, you know, people who've come before us, they didn't die for our freedoms. They fought for them. They killed for them. So people talk about, oh, so many people have lost their lives defending our liberty. But the real point of the cartoon was, let's not focus on the people who died for our liberty. Let's realize that people killed to protect our liberty. That's how important it was. So, you know, that's definitely a different way of thinking about it and looking at it. Sacrifice is one thing, but other people took it seriously enough to get up and fight for it. And that's where we're at now, I think. We need to get up and fight.
Hey, Ken, I found the video. I'm going to share it. I'm
Okay.
going to try to share it.
Make sure you pick the little box that says you share your audio.
I did.
Okay.
Make sure you guys
I'm
can.
not 100% sure why I'm being asked to share the story, but I'm guessing it's because somebody needs to hear it. When I was 16, I went into what I thought was going to be a normal day at biology class. And when I walked in, all the desks were arranged in a circle in the middle of the room. And the instructor, who had always been a really amazing, loving, kind instructor, was super militant, super scary, and just looked at us and said, "Sit down, shut up. You are not allowed to move, to speak at all, and anyone who does will immediately fail my class." And we were all stunned. I get like, just thinking about it, because I was a straight A student and grades were really important to me, and I was just like terrified. So we're all sitting there silently, nervous out of our minds. And in the middle of this circle that we were all sitting in, there was one desk. And on this desk was a bowl with a goldfish in it. And he looked at us and he took the goldfish and he put it on the desk and he walked out and he shut the door. And we all just looked at each other, just like, what do we do? You know, like, obviously it violated like everything inside of me to like watch this fish die. And also, I heard the instruction: if you speak, if you move, you will automatically fail the class. And so we all sat there looking to each other to do something because we didn't want it to be us. And what was a very painful, it felt like an eternity. It was probably like 2.5 minutes later. Hannah B, got up and said, "Fuck this," and took the goldfish and put it back in the bowl. And when she did that, he came out and he looked at all of us and he said, "Look what the world has done to you. You've betrayed yourself. For what?" And I think about that lesson all the time because I learned in that moment that I am never going to be that person ever again. That when I see something that is wrong, even if it's just me, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to do what's right. And I've done that over and over again in my life in very scary situations. But I'm sad for people who haven't learned that lesson, because there are so many things that are wrong that if you're too scared to make a difference, you won't make right.
How do I unshare?
A lot of icons.
It is a lot. You're right. It's a crazy number.
You share again.
Huh?
Hit share again. Hit the same button you hit the share.
Oh, okay. There we go.
There you go. So yes,
All
very
right.
powerful.
So anyway, I felt like that was a very, powerful message, and does feel like we're kind of at the precipice of what do we do next. And I do think that the intention, bless you, the intention of this book club is to help us sort of get back to understanding what our forefathers intended, because I think a lot of why we are here is a lot of it's been either lost or it's not being followed, or I don't know how else to explain it except that it just feels like we've lost our roots in our Constitution. And like you said, Rochelle, earlier, as it relates to some of these things, like why isn't that person convicted of treason? You can see it in the simple words in our Constitution. It should be, right? And so I feel like every day for a couple years now, I've been asking why, talking to the TV a lot, going, why is that happening? And why did that just happen? So, I guess being educated and equipped to have some intelligent conversations with people, is one of the things we can do.
I'm sorry, I haven't been paying attention to hands because we have for one moderator down. So John has his hand up. I don't know if that was from way earlier. Probably from way earlier. He looks as surprised as I am. All right, how about you, Fred? Your hand is up too.
That was from a long time ago.
All right.
Uh-oh.
All right, so I just
We'll
pointing
have to
out
tell
the
Michelle.
failure there.
We'll have to tell
Yeah.
Michelle that we need another, that we
Yes.
need her.
Can't manage the hands without her.
So hopefully you guys, we love doing this on Sunday nights. It gives us something to look forward to, and hopefully you guys do too. I'm looking forward to continuing on to the next articles. I think we have 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then we'll move on to the amendments.
Right, it's a little dry, we'll admit, but it's interesting. So we'll work through it and see what we can do in the way of accomplishing some good conversation. On the bright side, I think, oh no, never mind. I was gonna say, I thought Article 4 was super short, but it's not, never mind. No bright
So
side.
the feedback though, do you guys want us to read them, or would you rather read them and just discuss? I mean, does it help? Because it's fairly easy to read through them, to bring those topics, is it easier to talk about them when we're reading through it? Just like your feedback, because this isn't like super juicy, spicy stuff we're reading.
It's not.
I think the amendments will be more fun.
I do too. I do.
So we'll just grin and bear it until we get there.
All right.
I've read the amendments
All right.
several times, but I don't think I've ever read the articles. I know the preamble, but I don't think I've ever was assigned the articles to read as a student.
Right, and I
Right.
think there are some good articles that we'll get to. There's a gentleman that we run into at the coffee shop who is really quite the Constitution buff, and he talks about some specifics, particularly as we chug along here in the Supremacy Clause and such that we'll get to in Article 6. So we'll see. Maybe we'll get a little juicier as we go.
All right. Well, you guys have a great week. Anybody that's coming to the Breakfast Club tomorrow, I'll look forward to seeing you bright and early.
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.